Hi, and welcome to the second video. It's entitled Fiascoes and Successes. And we're going to do 3 case studies about the airline industry. And in this segment, we're going to start looking, hunting for fundamental forces. We're trying to see if fundamental forces are aligned for success. And what would success be? Using our problem-solving brains together, or they misalign and kind of forcing us to use our combative brains. In review, I've already mentioned one thing. There's 3 things from the tools we brought before. We've already talked about the 2 brains. The second thing is skin in both games. Remember what I meant by that? I meant the upside, which we all think about. But are we also going to feel the consequences of the downside? And that changes our thinking. And the third one was, I remember talking about 3 radars, and essentially it meant we were focused forward. And we're going to use all 3 of those tools today. I'm going to do 3 case studies. The first one is labor law in the airline industry. And that's the one we're going to be looking for a fundamental force. And then I'm going to do 2 more. One is Brad predicts labor votes. We're going to get another tool out of that one. And the third one is Great American Company, which I had the pleasure of working for the first 15 years of my career. And also we're going to get a tool out of that one. So we're looking for 1 fundamental force and 2 more tools in this section. Okay, study 1, labor law in the airline industry. In our country, we have 2 different labor laws. The one that the airline is under is the Railway Labor Act. It came in 1926. And the one that most of the industries are in is the National Labor Relations Act. Okay, let me talk about the second one that the airline industry is not in. Maybe you hear about this. I mean, we don't have a lot of unions in our country anymore. But occasionally you might hear that one's going on strike, and you'll hear about it on Wednesday. And they'll talk about, well, they could go on strike at midnight on Friday because that's when the contract expires. And then Thursday you might hear some saber rattling Friday. And you know, maybe they do go on strike on Friday night, but then they seem to negotiate all Friday night and Saturday. And by Monday morning, it's usually over. Why is that? Because under the National Labor Relations Act, contracts expire. So when I said midnight on Friday that the contract expired, that meant 2 things. That meant that labor could go out on strike, legally not show up to work, go with the picket signs, and 2, management can fire them. Okay, at that exact moment, guess what? Those 2 groups have skin in both games. And there's a lot of pressure at that moment, but life gets very, very real. The consequences and the opportunities. And so that's what forces them to come to the negotiation table and get it all knocked out. Unfortunately, the Railway Labor Act, which the airlines are in and the railroads are in, none of that ever happens. Under the Railway Labor Act, which I'm sure was intended with the best of intentions when it was written, contracts do not expire. In other words, if you have a 5-year contract and it ends on January 1st of this year, on January 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, or for the next couple of years, you can still be negotiating, but the existing contract is still in place. So there's no pressure for either side to make a deal. I mean, labor wants more money. Management's job is to keep down costs. So if they start negotiating and labor is going to ask for more money, and management says, well, we can't do that, and we'll push it off over next week or the next month. There's no pressure, or there's no moment for these contracts to expire, or for them to have consequences on both sides, the up and down. Long and short of it, it's very common in the airline industry for contracts. They're usually between 3 to 5 years, and it's not uncommon for contracts to be extended or not be negotiated for a year or two after the expiration date. And in fact, my very last contract that I had when I was flying at the airline, it took 4 years after the contract had expired for us to get a deal. And we had to pick it to do it. Okay, so the Railway Labor Act is what I would call a systematic, dysfunctional thing. And what happens during this whole period of time, when the contracts are expiring and stuff, that's a very stressful thing for people to go to work and not know whether they're going to get a contract, and not know whether they're going to get a contract for a couple years. And you can buy and sell an airline in 12 to 18 months. You can wash them through bankruptcy in 12 to 18 months. But it takes years to negotiate to get a contract? That doesn't seem right. And there's like about 3 or 4 major unions at each airline. And so when you're going to work, there's always at least one union that's wigged out because they're several years in negotiations and they've gotten nothing. And it's a very frustrating, and it becomes a very hostile environment. And which brain do you end up using? The last contract we did, I said it was 4 years after our extended date. We had what I thought was a reasonable negotiating team the first 2 or 3 years. And finally, the pilot said, we're done with that. They got in a junkyard dog. We started picketing, and bada bing, bada boom, we got a contract. That's terrible. And when you go through that kind of process, and it's taken that long, no one wins. You may get the contract you want, or you may not, but you hate management for going through that. And management probably isn't too happy with labor. And the way and the other part of the way contracts go in the airline industry, every 8, 10, 12 years, the stars align for labor, and sure enough, they whack the hell out of management and get a big contract. And then then management, in 8 or 10 years later, they'll just wash it through bankruptcy, and they'll get rid of about a third of what they gave labor the last time, get rid of about a third of the people or less, and that's how it goes. It yo-yos up and down, and it's a very hostile environment the whole time. And what brain do you end up using? And we talk a lot about the echo chambers we have in our society now. I think the first echo chambers that I recognize were for pilots and flight attendants. It's hotel bars. You go, if you're in a hotel that has an overnight cruise there, and then the bar, you will find airline crews, and they will be saying the same thing over and over and over and over again about management or scheduling stuff. And then the break rooms at the airports, where the airport workers are, when the negotiations are in their second or third year, those are echo chambers, just as ugly and as nasty as the ones we have online. The bottom line is that after you've been through this for 10, 12 years or so, or something, you internalize that the other side, you hate the other side because they're taking from you. And you institutionalize being combative with your boss or with labor or whatever. Okay, so that, I guess back to the point, what's the fundamental force that's aligned? I would argue that the airline industry is always going to have a dysfunctional labor relations because we're under the Railway Labor Act. If we would just simply be moved over the National Labor Relations Act and our contracts would expire, we could fight for maybe over the weekend and we'd get one done. and I think it would be a breath of fresh air. And I actually wrote an article about that in Aviation Week, I think back in 2000 or something. I'll point it out here. Okay, that's the end of case study number 1. Case number 2, Brad predicts labor votes. I'd been at the airline about 20 years or so anyway, and I was trying to get a second job working with the investment community. When I got out of college, that's where I had hoped I would end up. Obviously, that never happened. Anyway, I started writing. I bumped into a analyst, Solomon Brothers analyst named Julius Maltudis, and asked him for a job, a part-time job, and he said, "No, kid, but could you write a newsletter and predict labor votes for us? Because when the union management are fighting, it looks like, he said, she said, and their contracts look like IRS tax codes, and we can't understand any of those. Can you sort that out?" I said, "Yeah, sure." Of course, I had no idea how I would do any of that, but I actually found out I actually turned out to be very good at it. I think I correctly predicted 39 out of 42 votes, and I stumbled into how it worked. And long story short, what I would do is I'd get on my phone and I would call all the people I knew at the different airlines, and I needed to talk to everyone before to figure out how they were going to vote when the contract came up. And I took copious notes and stuff and everything, and then I made a very simple system. After I talked to somebody, I would code them as either Kool-Aid drinkers, good guys, or Bolsheviks. The Kool-Aid drinkers, they were good guys, but they were going to vote yes. They were they tended to be kind of headquarters people or supervisors and stuff, and you just knew they were always going to vote yes. The Bolsheviks, which also could be good guys, they were always going to vote no. The man was always keeping them down, and they had an ideology thing in their head, and they were always going to vote no. Now, in good times, the Kool-Aid drinkers were only 10% of the group, and the Bolsheviks were only 10% of the group. And that left 70-80% of the group in the middle, and I called them good guys. And they wanted to go to work, they wanted to do a good job, they didn't want a lot of fuss, and they didn't really want fighting and stuff. And then if you could figure out which way the good guys were going, you could pretty easily predict the vote. Anyway, I'll leave that there, and just to let you know, in the next video, when we start trying to build a team, we're trying to build a good guys team. Okay? I need to tell you one more part about predicting votes. Oh, I need to tell you actually a couple more things about predicting votes. First of all, when I first did it, like I said, I didn't know what was going on. And then after I watched 2 or 3, they seemed choreographed. You could just, management would say this and labor would say that, and then you knew what it meant. Well, one of the ones I loved, after probably about a year or so after they were supposed to, the contract expire, you'd often hear labor say, "We will meet management in the middle if they'll come to the middle." And you know what that meant? You know what it meant to me? They're not going to get a contract for another year. And I used to joke, and actually I kind of mean it true. You could take labor and management when they were fighting, and you put them on a football field, and each one on the goal line. And you would say to them, "Go to the middle and talk to the other." And both of them would go, even if they're on a football field, they got the yard markers on there. And both of them would go, and maybe they get past 35, and maybe they get to 40, but both of them would stop at 40. And they look at each other. They could not physically go to the middle. Because if they did, then they were a loser. Like if they go to the middle, then the other side was sitting at the 40, and they cut it in half, and now they've lost. That was what was in their head. And today, if you took Democrats and Republicans and put one on the goal line and the other one on the goal line, told them to go to the middle, I don't think either one would kind of get past the 40-yard line. Just saying. We'll discuss that later. Okay, the second thing about predicting labor votes that I learned, and this is really one of the key things that I'm going to use in the following videos. It's a very powerful, fundamental tool to understand. It's easy to understand. Okay, if the labor vote went 48-52, no matter for or against, it really didn't matter. The people that got 52, they immediately thought, we've won. We'll talk about unity for about 36 hours, but basically sit down and shut up. We've won. The 48, they were so bitter because they lost the vote because the other side did dirty tactics. I mean, all the time they said the other side cheated and lied and manipulated them. And if they got 48 for the votes, they were like, we were so close. We just have to work harder next time, we'll win. So if you had a vote like 48-52, in democracy, you feel like you've made a decision, you're going to move forward. What I saw was the exact opposite. If the vote went 48-52, or inside that, they just kept fighting. And they immediately started the next elections right then. And they were fighting. And was anybody, they certainly weren't using their problem-solving brain anymore. They were using their combative brain against each other, inside the group. If the vote went 45-55, now you started to break some chains of being stuck. And there was some movement, but not a lot. It wasn't until the vote went 66-33. When a vote happened like that, for a contract, let's say it went for the contract, 66% people voted for a contract. That's what I call democracy magic. Then the 33 were still not happy. Their voice had been heard, and they realized the group just didn't buy it. And from then, everybody kind of took a deep breath, and then you did start moving forward. You did start using your problem-solving brains. You were kind of working together again. You weren't combatants anymore. And I'm talking about this is inside the group. And again, it doesn't take a lot to see where I'm going with this. The last two elections, presidential elections, have basically been 48-52. And did it seem like we decided anything? I mean, didn't we just keep fighting? And in our society right now, I mean, elections are going on all the time. I mean, I remember at the 2018 election at night, I was watching it, and it was like 9:30 or 10, and they'd kind of figured out who had won and stuff. And they started talking about, well, how's this going to impact the 2020 election? And I'm like, wait a second. We got 2 years here. Are they going to do any work? Nope. We were all going to talk about the next election. And it's the same thing of, when the negotiations went too long in the airline industry, all you were doing is talking about your contract negotiations. Nobody was talking about the job they were doing or the customers. Anyway, enough of that. Okay, so that's the important thing. I call it democracy magic when the vote goes 2/3 one way and 1/3. That's when you start focusing forward, which is, by the way, another fundamental force that I think is evil or good. Third thing is the Great American Company. I got to Southwest Airlines in 1987. Herb Kelleher was the CEO, and it truly was a great American company. And in fact, just to document that, I'm going to put up a slide here now. Money Magazine said from 72 to 202, that's 30 years, Southwest Airlines stock, LUV, was the #1 stock on the New York Stock Exchange. When I say we were a great American company, we were rewarding the investor. The customers loved us. I mean, they did love us, and we loved being there. I can tell stories and stories and stories. It was fun to work there. And believe me, we were using our problem-solving brains. I could go on and on about Herb Kelleher. In fact, one of my great disappointments is the book I wrote about safe landings. I hope to kind of document and celebrate Herb Kelleher's accomplishments in leadership. But the next, no one read the book. One of my many entrepreneurial efforts that I enjoyed doing, and I learned a lot, and I didn't make any money. I have a whole series of those, by the way. But I wanted to celebrate his life, and I wasn't able to do that. The next, after Herbert Colleen and Jim Parker, we got a kind of a different group of leaders. They kind of went down the corporate path, and they brought in McKinsey, and God, those people destroy airline employees. Anyway, that didn't happen. So let me stop you there. But I want to pick up one more tool about working at Southwest Airlines during those 15 years in my case that were just outstanding. I talk about it in the book. There was a trust between labor and management. And here, I'll pop up some pictures here. Here I'm fishing with Herb Kelleher in Alaska. Once a year, he'd take the union representatives, union leaders, and management, and go up to Alaska and drink a whole shitload of whiskey and tell a bunch of lies and fish. And we came back always as friends. And enough of that. I really could talk about it. It was just really fun to go to work. Anyway, the tool that I'm looking for when there's trust between labor and management is called what I call self-policing. When Herb was running around, I'm sure we had some supervisors, but it was very, very thin. Everybody's working together, so you're more productive. You keep costs down because you don't have a big supervisory group. Because you're playing on a team, and you don't want to let down other team members. But if you saw somebody else kind of wandering off, not doing the right thing, the person standing next to him or someone in their group that they worked with would stop them and talk to them. If I saw another captain getting out of line, or I would go talk to him. And that's when we'd have these little chats, and they would kind of correct people. But it wasn't the bosses, supervisors coming down. We didn't write people up back then or anything. We dealt with it ourselves. So, and you don't self-police unless you believe the boss, you trust the boss. Because then if you trust the boss, then it's your responsibility to take care of operations or the job that you're doing. Self-policing is going to be one of the most powerful tools inside of a group to get it moving forward. And we'll talk about that some more. That's it today. So what's the three things that we learned? The fundamental forces, the Railway Labor Act. If you're going to fight forever or negotiate forever, it just wears people down, and they become bitter, and nobody's having any fun. And the second one was when you get the good guys team working, it's just a wonderful place, and that doesn't usually happen. It doesn't flip in until a vote goes 2 out of 3. Until you get 2 out of 3 people in that group basically singing from the same page. I mean, inside that group, there's all kinds. There's tall people, short people, people wearing blue shirts, people wearing white shirts, people with no hair, people with a lot of hair. You know, some are tall, some are great looking like me, and some are, you know, ugly like me. But you all want to do a good job. That 2 out of 3 is very important. And the last one was self-policing. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next video.